All right, good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to the Building Equitable Tenure for Upper Midwest Farmers training brought to you by Commons Land, Justice and Law Agrarian Trust, and a team of land advocacy supporters. I'm Gary Hampton. I'm an equitable land access advocate, and I'll go ahead and introduce the agenda that will flow through tonight. We'll have the welcoming to this co-learning community, and then we'll engage in interactive approaches to what is equitable farmland access and tenure. We will cover challenges and opportunities, take a look at historical context, and we'll take a break, and then we'll engage in an activity using Jamboard and breakout rooms. And then there will be time for us to come back and do shared learning and reflection. And then also we'll share more about the co-learning opportunities and the mentor program. I'd like to now go ahead and allow our presenters to introduce themselves, and we'll start off with Moses Momanyi.
My name is Moses Momanyi. I'm a farmer here in Cambridge, Minnesota, and I also incubate or mentor other farmers, mostly African immigrant farmers, since 2020. And I also am part of the Land Access Navigators through Renewing the Countryside for Minnesota. So I'm glad to be here with all of you. Thank you.
Okay, Naima, could you introduce yourself, please?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Naima Dore. I am a Somali American farmer. I farm with my family. My husband and I own 20 acres, and we primarily work with the community growing culturally Pacific food. So we specialize in vegetable production, expanding in grain. And I'm also the director for the Somali American Farmers Association. Looking forward to this conversation this evening. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, Valentine, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, thank you, Gary. I'm Valentine Cadieux. I'm currently the director of Hamline Center for Justice and Law, and I work with Commons Land in the Twin Cities Community Agricultural Land Trust, and also really looking forward to this co-learning opportunity.
Aaliyah.
My name is Aaliyah Frazier, and I work with Agrarian Trust on these SARE grants, building out cohorts of ag professionals who are knowledgeable and able to, share about equitable farmland tenure, connecting landowners and land seekers. So that's my project that I'm working on with Agrarian Trust, but I also have a farming background and have worked with different land collective projects in the past.
Okay, thank you to all the presenters. Next, we'll cover the objectives of this training. Objective 1 is review of resources and networks available for increasing equitable farmland access. Build a shared understanding of what equitable means in regards to farmland access. Review historical context to land access and tenure in Minnesota and the Upper Midwest. And finally, discuss key challenges and opportunities for equitable farmland access in your professional field. What support is needed will be the question we'll seek to answer. And now I'll hand it over to Aaliyah.
Thank you, Gary. Good to see everyone here and good to see everyone introducing themselves in the chat. We are going to be recording this, so you'll be able to sit back and watch it again later. As I mentioned, this is a SARE-funded project, and there's a goal to this project of landowners and land seekers being able to complete land transactions in a way that is more easeful and more supported than they have been in the past. And a lot of people have been doing this on their own, running into a lot of roadblocks, and you're going to hear some of those challenges and opportunities from people on the call today. So we're having this online session right now, and then in 2 weeks, on July 27th, we're gonna have a follow-up where we go into more depth. We're gonna have case studies and really give examples. So today it's, getting to know each other, the big high level picture of what equitable land tenure means. And then next time we'll dig deeper into the details and examples. If you want to be part of the cohort of people who will be co-learning together and creating a community of practice, please stay on the call at the end. But we're gonna also have an on-farm meeting and follow-up, so that you'll be able to go deeper with the cohort and network with each other and really, get to the bottom of some of these challenges and opportunities. And then those who participate on that on-farm training, as well as these 2 online trainings, will be invited to be mentors or advocates. So we're excited for people who are interested in this, and we're also just excited for people who are here to learn and, network a little bit. All right, so here's the fun part. We're gonna start to get to know everyone in the room and, get a little interactive with these questions. So the first question we want to know is what you're looking forward to today. Awesome. So people are excited to learn about the ways you can advocate and support this movement as a young farmer. Networking to be more effective, hearing what farmers need, understanding existing opportunities and how to help others access land, new ideas, learning from others, building relationships, moving equitable land access forward, not just talking, but doing something. Really like that. Getting to know farmland access leaders. Awesome. I think we're gonna get to a lot of these today, but also remember, if you really want to go deeper, you gotta keep coming and come back to the one July 27th and sign up for the cohort. Thank y'all for sharing. Okay. I think we can go to the next question. So the topic of this webinar is what is equitable, or it is about equitable farmland tenure. So the question of this webinar is what is it? And we want to hear from everyone what their definition of that is, or what does it mean to you? Okay, what does it mean to people on this call? Community and preserving culture, lower cost entry, various models of land tenure, prioritizing BIPOC farmers, land access for the 99%, having diversity in who grows food, secure tenure to land, space for more than humans as well, making it possible for more people to get started in farming. In one sense, equity is about fairness, and in another, it's about the ability to recoup investments made. Interesting. Thank you for these responses. Are there any coming in on the chat as well?
No.
Prioritizing indigenous land back actions, supporting immigrant and beginning farmers, access to land, farming and community. Wow, seems like a lot of people here have been having these conversations and thinking about these questions. Which is why we want to ask one last question before we get into the presentations for today, to get a sense or poll in the room of how familiar are you already with this topic on a scale of 1 to 10. And then after this, we're going to go into Moses to hear about some of his amazing work on the ground with equitable land tenure. Moses and Naima. Okay, so looking at this quick poll, we've got a lot of people over 5, 8, 7, a 3, a 5. It's good to know that looks like we have a group that's already been having these conversations and thinking about this. And hopefully that'll just, we'll add more fuel to your fire and more knowledge for your knowledge bank so that you'll, be even stronger in helping people with this topic. So that's it for the polls for now. And now I'm going to pass it off to Moses.
Thank you, Aliyah. Again, my name is Moses. I have been farming here in Minnesota as an immigrant since 2009. I grow vegetables, I sell at the farmers market, and then I've started working with farmers, other people who want to be farming, because I just felt like I knew a little bit of where the, like the background, the experience those people who wanted to be farmers have, but they have this challenge getting into farming. So I, and because of also the, murder of George Floyd and the pandemic, all those things were like things that made people want to get into farming. So, so along with that, my interest also was in, well, if we're gonna learn about farming and we want to like have land, there are many challenges that we find we don't really know. Like maybe we don't feel like we have a chance to like get this land. I usually give a story of how before I got into farming, I always think I got into it by sheer luck, but also even before that, I used to drive around and just think, well, I don't know if I can be one of those like farmers who have a nice big farm and cattle lying on the, grazing and all that. So to me, I think that is also something that we think about as equity, where, like there are those who don't have a chance, but equity means we find ways to give them a chance to be part of it. So I'll start by doing that presentation. You can see here, 3 people, one is short. They have just been given same platform. And it's the shorter one is sad because they can't get up there and grab the things that are falling from up above. And then if one way that like cushion, I would say, that is given to the taller guy is taken and given to the shorter guy, they will still have the same ability to get to what they need. So that's what equity is, distributing fairly. An example will be bank loan. And if you were to go get a bank loan, maybe you need, most of the time, the bank or the credit or the person giving you the loan will want to check your credit history. If you're an immigrant and you've been here only 3 years, you won't, even if you did everything perfect, you will not have that credit history that somebody who started when they were maybe 16 has. So, or even just the connection, with if they have a network of people who can vouch for them to get that loan. And then how do we make that equitable? That will be, can we create programs to help those people? Because now we understand their situation, then we'll be doing it more. We'll be bringing equity into that issue. Next slide, please. So why equitable farmland access? Why do we need that? For service providers, I see, like being a land navigator is just one of the service providers that we can think out there. You know, if you are a real estate agent, if you are an attorney, if you work for, you know, a government institution that deals with the land and people who want to access land, you are just the same service provider. So we play an important role in promoting access, addressing challenges that farmers face. This might include technical assistance. I always see what I do as more of technical assistance because I become an interpreter. I try to troubleshoot what the land seeker is trying to look for, you know, and move them along. I connect them with the other resources, but also service providers can be policy advocates. What they see out there, they can, you know, goes to the, you know, the policy makers too, and build that collaboration across the board. Next, please. So that's, in a nutshell, the role of navigators is to help landowners and land seekers connect, and then make it possible for the land seeker to access or acquire the land. But also it involves planning. That's one of their roles, is help the land seeker, the farmer, plan, because you're just not gonna buy land. What is related with what comes after that? If you saw a listing online, you know, that is half of the story, you know, about that land and about the process. So there's more that goes in there. You know, you might think that 200,000 would be enough to buy that, but really when you get into all the details, you'll find that might not be enough. So that is planning. Accessing financing and resources by providing guidance to the farmers on accessing financing options and resources for land acquisition will be like all that we, you know, service providers will be doing. But I also feel like creating that knowledge and networking is also part of service providers, because the land owner who wants to pass on the land and the land seeker, they are always learning something new, and they sometimes feel like they don't know where these resources are. So service providers do play that role of connecting them. And then, of course, promoting or advocating for land access is part and parcel of what service providers do, is because then they are breaking those barriers to land access. So what are and this sometimes is the bulk of what I find to be at the center of what land access challenges are: historical injustices, such as racial segregation, redlining, forceful removal from the land, or broken treaties, you know, land seizures and homesteading. Like, I always find like I need to read a lot and educate myself about all the things that have happened that have brought all these big differences between those who are seeking to own land and those who don't have land. Like there are many barriers that have been put over the years. Now, all these barriers, they have like, they have advanced these other options, these other challenges like limited financing and discriminatory lending, you know, because of, you know, all the other things that really made the those who don't have land to even lack more, because we know land is one of the main vehicles to building wealth for those who don't have wealth. Land concentration involves when this big land, industrial agriculture, continue to buy available land and add to the big available land. This raises the prices, commodity like monetizes and or makes like land a real estate thing than more real estate transaction than just like a transaction that should be tied to like the basic need for everybody who is interested in building wealth and growing food and all that. Lastly, lack of information to underserved communities is a structural barrier. It's inbuilt and it continues to like make this worse. But service providers understanding all these things and trying to create programs or even bring those things, lessen those things as barriers to land seekers will, will make that connection of land access much better. Lastly, in the last slide, what can we do as service providers? I found creating partnerships and networks is like the biggest need that we have there, because then it helps identify the lands that are off market, in the market, connect people, because this is mostly people are like have ties to this land and they want to like have that connection, that human connection, even in the transaction. So service providers think about that. Outreach and education to both landowners and land seekers. Financial assistance, that will be more like the adding that stepping stool for the shorter person. Policy advocacy and supporting small-scale farmers. Networking with agricultural service providers. This can be all the other people who are like working in the agricultural industry and farming and land access. And then being culturally sensitive and inclusive, because the landscape of farming is changing and we do need to be aware of that. Lastly, we only can do these things if we do data collection and research on those that are underserved, that need that support. But also for those who have it, like what is going on, all that. So with that, I will pass it to Naima, and then Naima can add to what I've presented. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Moses. I might take a shelter because it's raining heavily here. We're having a hailstorm too, so I'm hoping everything goes well at the farm. And I just want to add my perspective. Someone who was a land seeker, now a landowner. I just feel like there's, I love what Carl put in the chat earlier. And sorry, I'm like a little bit nervous because there's a lot happening right now, literally. What I noticed he put in the chat was basically the system, and I don't want to misquote you, Carl, but a system that was never designed for someone like myself or Moses, or especially those that we work with. It's a lot to navigate existing programs, or just trying to really understand how things work here, coming from a different world, because we're accustomed to culturally just collectively working together. The way that we see land and land usage is completely different here, and so I think there's definitely conversations like this happening all over. There's a lot to learn, and I feel like the more we have these conversations, the more I just feel like, this is a really great time to have these conversations, these raw conversations. It can be uncomfortable in some cases, but, I think it's a good thing because I think it just leads to really including all those key players, like, those that are already either assisting emerging farmers like myself, just basically closing the gap in where we've seen these communications that oftentimes doesn't happen in real time, because farming and navigating this system, it does require a lot of communication, and things are moving fast and slow, depending on where and who you're dealing with. So my journey, I'm sure some of you are familiar with my story, but my family and I have been struggling with land for a long, long time. And mainly because, the way that we wanted, or the structure of our business and how we wanted, didn't fit with the landowners or the folks that we rented land from, or currently we're still in a different land than the one that we purchased right now, but I won't get into all of that because of, limitation. And, again, it's just really understanding these programs and how they work together, and everyone, like I mentioned, these key players that are important people, institutions, and government, because I feel like there's lack of understanding or just information are just not coming when needed. So that's just I have tons of other things that I could talk about, but because of time, I'll just stop right there. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Naima. One thing that we were also going to say that really might be a land access challenge is, in this country, we are used to land being, passing from one individual to another one individual. And when it comes to passing land from one individual to a collective, that is a whole thing that people find it like they don't understand why 5 people want to buy 5 acres together, something like that. So that I just wanted to put that there.
We hope everyone will join in the conversation about this when we come back from a small group conversation. And before we go into the small groups, I just wanted to add a couple of points to what Moses and Naima have been laying out in terms of this history that has gotten to where we are structurally. And I think, especially because our hope for this co-learning community is that we can learn our way into a more equitable system of farmland access and tenure. And there are some specific histories in the Upper Midwest that are really worth us pausing to understand. So we understand some of the specific structures, especially policy structures that may be hidden and people are running up against them. And by parsing them a bit, we can understand a bit more about how we got to where we are. So I came from a reparations version of the Rhonda Reconciliation lunch this afternoon, and I really appreciated the way that Trang Cruz started with a labor and land acknowledgement. And it's really, really relevant when we're talking about agricultural land, because the whole model of the way that infrastructure works for agricultural land access, tenure, and the whole financial infrastructure that relates to that in what is now called the United States is really recent and new. And that collective farming that Moses mentioned is much older and has a contemporary, continuous history on the land here. So we're on Anishinaabe and Dakota land with, as you can see in the slide, a really large neighbor network of very long-term Indigenous custodians of the land. And we're also in a place that has been shaped by a tremendous amount of migration, so great migration and remigration within the United States, migration from the American War in Vietnam, and from Central America, a lot of histories of colonial legacies that have led to tremendous dispossession and land loss. So a lot of us are familiar with the land loss, particularly in the Black farming community. And part of the reason that these specific histories, especially of dispossession and relocation, are important in Minnesota is that, one, we need to relearn a lot of the systems that have led to the infrastructure that we have to navigate. Two, we need to understand the traumas and healing involved in relationships with land. And I think often when we think about the status quo, we recognize that there, many of you in your registration for this webinar noted inequalities and equity gaps in the infrastructure. And I think it's really important that we understand that the agricultural system, particularly as it's set up in the United States, is set up in a history of structural extraction. So the stolen land and forced labor that is the legacy of this is not just a historical fact, but it's the way that all of our economic models were based, like what good agriculture looks like. So as we're in these moments of interest in reparations, interest in structural change, part of what as a community we need to co-learn together is how far down into the models that project agricultural success and what good farming looks like those brief historical models are, and how we can overturn those with a deeper reach into the long histories that, as I said, are continuous here of stewardship relationships with land. And so really spend time focusing on making not only our personal land relationships, but our institutional and bureaucratic infrastructure that we use to administer land relationships more joyful, with more space for healing and more space to acknowledge the responsibilities that we have to be accountable to land and to the communities of the land who have been displaced here and in the many places that have led people here. I'm sharing here, so Minnesota, a lot of great work has been done by the Emerging Farmers Working Group, really thinking about some of these equities and structural, the gaps in our structural situation in terms of equitable access. And the fact that 99.16% of Minnesota farmers are white really is reflected not only in the dominance of white farmers in land ownership, but also of who gets counted as farmers. And so just thinking about some of these places and where we can change that infrastructure, part of the transformation is by seeing that people who have been historically marginalized from the infrastructure have been radically resourceful despite the structural design dispossessing and extracting labor and land and value from them. And part of what, especially as white folks involved in this and in the agricultural service provision sector, there has been a history of disproportionately white service providers saying things like, well, farming is farming, or, there's a way to be successful and people need to assimilate to that. And part of what we need to do is to create communities of co-learning where we understand how to grapple with that toxic version of whiteness and be much more engaged and humble and grateful in learning with radically different agrarian communities who share access to land and agricultural economy and food sharing here. And I work in the Twin Cities and have been working in Ramsey County. And for those of you who are really interested in some of the specifics I'll get into, I will share the policy review we've been working on that's Ramsey County specific, but pretty relevant for all of Minnesota and a lot of the upper Midwest. I like to show this. This is the Harvest Gardens in Maplewood, which is 1,100 gardeners farming together. And it's a piece of land that would be recognizable as a single farm and also as 1,000 farms. And I think that that spectrum, when we bring people here, especially extension agents in the past, Carl and I have had some very interesting transformative experiences where people realize that they need to transform service provision from we need to help people who can't access the system to, wow, we need to learn alongside people who are navigating a system despite a lot of barriers and who are doing amazing, resourceful things in spaces that have not been set up for this. And so, for example, in the Twin Cities, agriculture is really not yet recognized as part of a normal land use that helps everybody thrive. So specifically, a couple of the barriers that I think help illustrate how we've gotten to this point and what we need to change are in Minnesota. One example is that agricultural land classification is only readily granted to farms that are over 10 contiguous acres. So if you're a single farmer trying to farm, say, food for your community, that's a very large amount of land to access, especially given the costs of infrastructure for horticultural production. And there are a lot of hoops to jump through. And part of what we've been learning is there's a lot of tests built into the modules for tax assessors about what a real farm looks like and what to be looking for to see if this really qualifies. And without qualifying for the category that your land is agricultural, you then also can't qualify for the next step, which is being part of the agricultural taxation process, which reduces taxes to an agricultural rate rather than a development rate. So for many farmers, that's one of the main things that allows them to cash flow as a farmer, is not paying development rates on their land. And so systematically not enabling people to access that really changes who counts as a farmer who's able to have land access and land tenure. In a parallel way, there's a long history in the upper Midwest of progressive attempts to keep power in the hands of farmers. And although that effort has not lived up to the racial equity aspirations that some of its main thinkers have had, there are Black and white populist histories in most of the states surrounding here. And there were amazing things that were done, and also there are a lot of places for improvement. Part of what we live with, without necessarily seeing how impactful it is a history of protection of agricultural land. So they tend to be referred to as the corporate farm laws, and they prevent corporations from taking over land. So on the progressive side, that means a state like Minnesota has the majority of its land still held by farmers rather than corporations. Whereas if you look at a state like California, the majority of its land is held by real estate investment trusts and other investors. And it's much harder to make structural changes in land that's held basically by financial sector. So we have a tremendous opportunity in the handful of states that have these restrictions. However, as Moses mentioned, it's one of the significant barriers that people don't necessarily anticipate to owning land or having a land holding strategy as a group. So these are kind of seeding the conversation as we go in to discuss what would we like to learn more about, with a couple of key takeaways, which is that the farmland access and tenure infrastructure is not well set up for supporting equity. We need better processes, and particularly we need to learn more about cultural and intercultural competency, literacy with agroecology, and those ways of relating to land that are accountable to community and land, and repairing and building a much more joyful and healing bureaucracy. And I will share this in the resources. There's an amazing law review that Jess Shoemaker did a couple of years ago about what's called Fee Simple Failures, about race and rural land, and the way that land grown for food for society is already public in many ways. It gets many public infrastructures. So we have much more claim on public aspects of farmland than we tend to understand. And she really exhaustively reviews those. So it's an amazing resource. I am going to turn it over to the breakout rooms with just a brief list here in my last minute of some of the strategies that people are using that we hope to go into more detail when we next meet, about things like cooperatives, both for farming and workers and community collectives for organizing farm and agricultural and food labor, community land trusts, which have a historic focus on affordability, also tribal trusts and land back movements, many ways to make commons and reduce people's debt burden in relation to holding and farming on land, and then strategies that really are focused on the agroecological or public benefits of farmland, like conservation easements or other conservation strategies, but focusing on the theme of joyful bureaucracy, that these all need community learning and negotiation processes to decide what kinds of stewardship norms and processes and evaluation are appropriate for the communities engaging in farming and are not further surveillance. So this is all available to you in the resource packet, and we will take a 5-minute break and come back for breakout groups.
See y'all at 7:27. Now that we're back, we're gonna go into our breakout sessions. I'll hand it over to Gary so that he could show the questions and kind of explain the process a little bit with Jamboard.
All right, thank you. As we go into the breakout rooms, we'll have 2 questions that we'll be fielding. And the 2 questions are, 1, how are people in your field addressing the challenges of equitable farmland access? And 2, what else would you like to learn about how to support equitable farmland access? And what we'll be doing is using Jamboard, and there will be a facilitator in each room that will capture the notes and the feedback from each participant and within the breakout room. And then what we'll do is we'll come back and we'll have some conversation and dialogue and a report back. As we do go into the breakout room, we do have some community agreements that we want individuals to be familiar with and take into consideration. And that's being prepared to not expect closure. Our truths are different, but they're still true. We're not here to dispute truths, but to listen for how to guide this community landward. Next one is listen for moments that may need a timeout to stop harmful patterns or aggressions if they arise. And then as needed, step back and step up.
So what we'd like to do is to spend a few minutes in kind of report back and conversation. I think at this point, we're a small enough group that we can combine conversation and report back. And maybe we'll organize that, just kind of go through the Jamboard pages in the order that they were filled in. Does this first group want to start us off?
Sure. So the first question, how are people in your field addressing the challenges of equitable farmland access? Came up having programs for beginning farmers, as well as identifying the barriers of those programs, looking at different requirements for loans, diversifying group of navigators, customized programs for BIPOC applicants, with lower interest rates, including anti-racism training in every project. That's part of the hopes. That's part of the second one too, I guess. Giving feedback to lenders. It's also been happening and see it as helpful. So the second question, what else would you like to learn about and how to support equitable farmland access? So more about financial structures, agricultural easements and land trusts, models for no-cost land ownership, and then let's say anti-racism training in both categories. So more of that as well.
I moved it over to the middle there.
Next.
And were those 2 latter parts, the easements and land trusts and the models, were those the kinds of financial structures you meant, or was there more content in the financial structures?
Anyone in our group want to jump in and say more about that?
I was thinking of rural investment cooperatives or real estate investment cooperatives and how they're being used.
Great. Because part of what we're doing is assembling the case studies and kind of folks to help us learn from this list. So fabulous. Anybody else have questions about this group or anything else we want to add in? How about room 2?
Okay. We had myself, Hannah, and Jan, and just to, okay. So to the first question, how are people in your field addressing the challenges of equitable farmland access? One instance was the Navigator program plays a role in that, providing diversity and access to their services and in the communities they work in. And then they work with landowners to understand the value of the land and the value of transferring the land. And Jane, do you have anything else you want to say to that in particular? Because I did note that it was your response.
Yeah, I would just say on that, working with landowners, that what we're trying to do is find people who have similar values or value equitable farmland access and see if we can work with them to make their farmland more easily available, more affordably available to farmers who otherwise wouldn't be able to have access.
Okay, and then another thing with the Navigator program Jay mentioned was the navigators are helping improve some of the relationships with the FSA. I guess they're accomplishing, developing, getting some things done. And then is that correct, Jan? I don't want to misspeak. Okay.
Yes, yeah, we've definitely seen some movement there in the positive in the last several years.
And then we had another response, intentional work being done to provide access and seek answers to how to increase land access. Still a lot of questions. This particular individual, no longer on the call, has cares for co-ops and excited about the possibilities of cooperatively owned land access, and likes the fact that they're values based, and has one of the questions is how to bring diversity to rural spaces. And then another thought on that one was intentionality of the different networks. What I'm seeing in the work that I'm doing is the intentionality of different networks that are there as allies to work and seem willing to help to make land more accessible, more equitably accessible. Then the second question was, what else would you like to learn about how to support equitable farmland access? How to make it happen, overcome the complexities, how to make communities more hospitable, and individuals share that collectively, that thought, and building equity for communities and the power of ownership as something that individuals should be able to realize. And then myself, I was learned more about the land access models and ecosystems and the potential of cooperative and land access methodologies, in particular the commons, to work to bring forward solutions, a solution. Then we also had, and I wasn't sure how to place those, interested in learning more, not involved at this time. So we have individuals that want to learn more on the learning journey, and has interest in also being a land buyer. So there's different possibilities out of that. So.
Fabulous. Well, and we're so grateful for those of you like Gary who are bringing co-op experience in. You can see a lot of demand for that, and also of all the navigators who are here. We're hoping this can help mesh with the Navigator curriculum over time. Third group, things you wanted to add that weren't already in those first two groups?
Yeah, so I was in group 3 with Kelsey, Jeremy, Karen, and Valentine, in and out a little bit there. And to the questions of how are people in your field addressing these challenges, we talked about assembly of steering committees that bring together diverse perspectives around land access, policy advocacy to impact the land access space, utilization of agrarian commons model to preserve farmland and provide access to beginning farmers and ranchers. So a lot of good stuff there. And then to what else would you like to learn? Some interesting points there around how leaseholders and communities can build equity through cooperative models. How do value chains connect to support regional food systems and beginning farmers and ranchers? Broad topics there. And then what's the practical application of equitable access in everyday life, which I thought was a really interesting perspective.
Thank you.
I just wrote while people were talking, so we'll see what hasn't been covered here. But I think our group really talked a lot about the power dynamic, I think, between landholders and land seekers. And in terms of the first question, how are people in your field addressing the challenges? Ka was a person, one of our group members who is actually like a service provider who's working in the community and also has experience as a farmer and gardener. And so how important it is to have that lived experience in navigating this work. And I think we see that in a lot of the land navigator programs happening in Minnesota too right now. And then also Naima was talking about the FSA officer that came out to see her land, and that just like blew the officer's mind and was like, wow, this is what you've been talking about this whole time. So like really demonstrating what we're talking about here on this call to those program officers to really like help change and shift their mindset to see that what we're talking about is happening on the ground. And then what else would we like to learn about how to support equitable farmland access? Some of us weren't totally sure, but I think the main thing that came out of that conversation was really the power dynamic of landowners and land seekers and how to navigate and speak truth to the power dynamic, especially around whiteness and power that folks have, even though they want to help move land along, that they really need to be able to release that and think about land legacy in a different way. And that like emerging farmers can really like push that land legacy forward. They just have to step back a little bit. So I just want to keep having that conversation. 15 minutes was not enough with our group. So that's what I'll say for now, unless anyone, Naima or Phoebe or Ka, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think 15 minutes was not enough. I agree with you. And, you know, this is what I said earlier. It's just having raw conversation, like really addressing the elephant in the room is just, if it's about legacy, let's have that conversation, you know, but I think there's definitely a huge interest based on other conversation in other spaces. People want to engage and learn and you know, have that conversation about transition, but just not quite ready to let go because of, and I think I was the one who said about addressing again another elephant in the room, which is power and really control of land usage and continuing historically what they've been doing, which is a struggle for many, it seems like, but would love to continue to have conversation.
Why people should come back next time. All right, the last group.
Yes, I can share. I heard from Moses and Kara and Shelley. I know some other groups talked about policy change, but we had a specific example of changing the minimum acreage that we heard about earlier, addressing not just land access, but also markets to help sustain farm businesses and skills and access to networks. We heard about the Midwest Farmland Access Hub, which reaches across state borders and helps support small organizations. The idea of sharing land with other people, so not just having sort of an individual approach, and that could be a few people or it could be a lot of people. Exploring different entity structures to hold land and building strong networks, understanding constraints were some of the things that are already going on in the field to address challenges. And on the second question, what else people wanted to learn, we talked about resources for sustaining farm businesses beyond just starting, what it takes to maintain and steward land, and how to incorporate this work into funding opportunities that expect certain deliverables, and recognizing that this work is slow, that it can take a really long time to organize an entity to hold land, for example, and how that network building can work within funding structures. And I'll leave it at that unless anyone wants to add anything I missed.
I'm super grateful for everybody's sharing. And I am just going to wrap up this section. Please come back in 2 weeks. We will continue doing this. Also, just a little bit on, we're doing this that's really framed toward folks working as agricultural service providers and folks who are supporting farmers. I just wanted to call out, almost everybody in the room has been contributing to some sort of learning in their communities and specifically in this region. So there's a couple of domains for education series here. Something I wanted to bring to people's attention, for those who've been waiting to know what the program for the USDA Discrimination Financial Assistance Program is. So if anyone feels like they or people they know have ever been discriminated against in USDA loans, there's a current program trying to address that. And there's a webinar that will also be recorded right after this. So that's there. And then we've mentioned a couple of previous series that will also be in these resources for people who feel like they're new and want to dig in deeper. So I'll turn this back over to Naima.
All right, well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. In closing, like Valentine just mentioned, we do want you to come back, and if you have additional questions, feel free to reach out directly to any of us. But I will directly say, reach out to Aaliyah, if that's okay. Aaliyah, I don't know if you put your email in the chat, but you can certainly provide that as well. Next slide. I don't have, for some reason. Okay, so please join our next webinar on July 27th to dig into more examples of equitable land tenure and case studies. Please stay on the Zoom until 7:30 to discuss the cohort learning opportunity for ag professionals and advocates.
There was one question in the chat. What is joyful bureaucracy? That may have been when Valentine was speaking.
This is, for those of you who've worked with Melvin Giles, something we've worked on a lot in, especially all the paperwork, working with loans, banks, involves so much historical and personal trauma in people's experiences of this. And one of his requirements has been, I'll work with you on paperwork if it's joyful. And it has been over the last 10 years a really interesting challenge to think, like, bureaucracy doesn't have to suck. How can we make this a good learning experience, a good healing experience, a place where, especially interacting with community and public services, where those really reflect the community and government we want to learn into being. It can happen.
It sure can happen. I have a brief 5-second experience dealing with FSA. I mean, they literally went from 100 pages, I'm exaggerating, for their direct loan to, I think, 11 pages last time I talked to them. So someone is listening and taking notes. It can be done.
Thank y'all for all your sharing and energy into this call. We just want to get a little temperature of the room and ask, what are you taking away from this meeting? There is a lot of work to do and lots of interest in doing it. I love seeing that. We're stronger together, opportunities to collaborate. I really hope there's been a lot of networking happening. Glad to be connected to the land access minded community in this region, explore various strategies, lots of amazing resources and existing contributors in the space. Lots of folks with the same questions, struggles, drive. People are thinking deeper about the barriers to land access as related to whiteness and white people not wanting to give up power. Learning what other service providers are doing. There's lots of ways to work together. Yeah, that's one thing about this space of land access. Like, people are very driven, very passionate. They love what they do. And I think that, the reward is, connecting people to land. So it's good to be in good company always with these conversations. Between this webinar and the next one, everyone who's registered and everyone who's still here will get a follow-up to let you know how that'll look. Thanks for everyone for being here. And I want to invite anyone who wants to be part of this cohort that does have a lot of benefits, but we're going to go into more of the benefits and what it could look like on the last few minutes of this call.